This is video broadcast of Athena Academy of Geopolitics.
Hello there, my name is Govind Kulkarni, and in this video I intend to cover very shortly some basic aspects of sea power theory and naval blockade. Sea power theory is a vast subject, we all know that. So in this short talk I will focus more on the geostrategic and naval aspects. The fundamentals of classical geopolitics are centered at three basic theories: land power theory, sea power theory, and air power theory. And of course, the fourth dimension of astropolitics must be added to the overall strategic thinking these years and into the future. To start the talk on sea power, in retrospect, one can trace the thought process as back as to the history of Athens, which was a sea power, and Sparta, which was a land power. Sparta, as a land power, was always a challenge to Athens, which was predominantly a sea power state. As we all know, nearly 71% of Earth's surface is covered with water. Alfred Thayer Mahan, the father of sea power theory, defined sea power theory in the late 19th century in its broadest sense. In his grand strategic calculations, a sea power springs fundamentally from peacetime commerce and shipping. Navy actually is included as the military strength to rule and secure the sea by force, to project nation states military strength seawards and beyond. According to Bateman, maritimeness is based on a state's dependence. Maritimeness actually is the term coined by Bateman. According to him, a state's dependence, maritimeness, is actually a state's dependence on sea and is an amalgam of maritime tradition of a nation, size of the merchant fleet, and power of the navy, plus dependence on seaborne trades, size of the exclusive economic zone, value of offshore resources, and ultimately the capacity of domestic shipbuilding. Transportation and communication are at the core of geopolitics in all the dimensions. Geographically, compared to land, sea presents lesser obstacles in terms of freedom of movement. As regards political control of seas and oceans, on the other hand, sovereignty lapses after 12 nautical miles offshore, that is, from the lowest watermark on the baseline of any maritime nation. Such way, seas and oceans provide the greatest opportunities in terms of freedom of navigation and global dynamic presence. Simultaneously, on the other hand, in the context of geographical determining constant, the vastness of all the oceans taken together is also challenging, as seas and oceans or sea or oceanic distances are enormous, and journeys via sea routes are time consuming even this day. For instance, average breadth of the Atlantic Ocean is around 6,000 kilometers. Moreover, weather conditions at sea are very dynamic. A peculiar fluid medium, that is water, limits the surface level movement also of the vessels to around 40 to 45 nautical miles. Geography means distribution of anything and everything on the face of the earth. This is the basic, very simple, elementary definition of geography. And whenever we talk of geopolitics, it's a combination of geography plus politics. So, particularly in the geographical sense, geography of sea power focuses on ease of accessibility and mobility. Vessels, that's why, must proceed along predetermined conventional routes to ensure safe arrival at the destination. Now, these traditional routes only are termed as the sea lines of communication, SLOCS, as we abbreviate them. Hence, natural straits, man-made canals, and other such waterways have become geostrategic commodities. So these man-made canals, natural straits, and the traditional sea lines of communication definitely have become geostrategic commodities. Geostrategy means management of geopolitical affairs in both the context, military context and in the civil context. However, these sea lines of communications are regarded as the greatest commons also. That is, every nation has a fundamental right to pass through these waterways. Now, today there are several strong navies on the globe. To name them are United States of America, Russia, Greece, India, and China. United States of America has 11 aircraft carriers as far as I know, and the 12th one is coming up. India, my country, has developed capacities to build indigenous aircraft carriers and nuclear powered submarines also. And two of India's nuclear powered submarines are also operational, have become operational in last couple of years. Now, in the Indo-Pacific region, India is rising as a net security provider. I have a separate section on the geopolitical and geostrategic significance of the Indian Ocean, and I have designed it to trace the importance of the Indian Navy, which is rising as the net security provider in the Indo-Pacific region. But for this video, I'm going to touch upon the classical and fundamental dimensions of sea power and naval blockade. Now, geography of sea warfare dictates distribution of various ports, docks, harbors, extraterritorial possessions, and everything that can complement nation states' naval activities across the globe. Now, today, military strength afloat is a combination of capabilities of movement on the surface, below the surface, and above the surface. In terms of equipment, particularly, a naval power is a sum total of frigates, destroyers, landing crafts, patrol boats, submarines, aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and helicopters, and various other equipment, aerial equipment. Navy's functions are fundamentally to protect sea lines of communication, to move equipment, military equipment, as well as civilian equipment, troops across the seas, to maintain freedom of movement, as well as to obstruct opponents' movement in times of crisis. Now, most of the times, sea battles are fought far away from the homeland. Speed of advance and radius of action are crucial in naval warfare and naval strategy. Moreover, a naval battle has to be supplemented with land support, system of offshore bases, and repair facilities. Communication is the most important factor in sea warfare. Strength of forces, that is manpower plus equipment, modern equipment, state of the art equipment, is an important factor in maritime strategy. Maritime military strategy commands dispersion and distribution of forces. However, the decisive factor is positioning and presence of the forces, naval forces, in geostrategic oceanic areas. Now, as compared to land, seas and oceanic waters raise lesser obstacles in terms of movement across. This is 100% true in case of insular countries like the United States of America, the United Kingdom, Japan, and peninsular countries like India, China. However, sometimes difficulty in access to the great oceanic commons could be the primary challenge for some countries to rise as an overall superpower also. Russia and Germany could be historically and even in today's time observed as examples in this objective sense. But the significant factor is that during the decades of the Cold War, Russia, with its willpower, rose to one of the strongest navies in the world. But historically and traditionally, and in terms of fundamental geographical determinants, for Russia, which is typified as a land power, access to the Atlantic Ocean and to the Indian Ocean is not a straightaway affair or movement. Basically, to enter the Atlantic Ocean, Russia has to pass, or the Russian vessels has to pass either through the Baltic Sea or the Mediterranean Sea via the Black Sea. The short distance for Russia to the Indian Ocean passes either through the Suez Canal or through the Strait of Malacca. These maritime geographical compulsions on part of Russia have determined or had been determining its typical geographical behavior as a land power. But as I said, there was a time and there is still time that Russia is one of the strongest navies in the world. So geopolitics basically or at the core of discussion of geopolitics, the fundamental point of discussion is actually man-environment relationship and God's gift of free will to human beings. So geographical barriers, geographical obstacles could be surpassed, could be bypassed if you generate technology and if you have willpower. But anyway, in very conventional sense, Russia's difficulties could be observed in terms of becoming a land power. But Russia definitely is one of the has been one of the greatest naval power in the world, particularly in last century and in this century. On the other hand, a small insular country like the United Kingdom once ruled the entire globe just because of the fact that the United Kingdom was the strongest navy in the world. Mention here is to the Battle of Trafalgar, which took place in 1805 AD under the command of Sir Horatio Nelson, and it changed the history of the world for the next 200 years. British Navy was invincible for nearly 150 years, particularly till 1956. I can say the Navy of the United Kingdom was the strongest navy in the world. Talking about famous British spy movies, James Bond, Ian Fleming's character, that is James Bond, actually belongs to the United Kingdom's Navy and his rank is commander. Now, a very short, brief talk on naval blockade. Now, if you refer to any book of international law, maritimeness, sea power, and naval strategy, you will definitely find an extensive and separate chapter on naval blockade. To understand naval blockade, its purpose, conditions, and effectiveness, I'm going to make references to two very distinctive oceanic scenarios. One is from the recent past that happened in the Atlantic Ocean, and other is a hypothetical imagination in the Indo-Pacific area. Nearly 90% volume of world trade passes through oceanic waters and geostrategic choke points. This is a common knowledge. The Strait of Malacca, the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, Strait of Bosphorus, and the Strait of Gibraltar. These are some natural and man-made greater commons. Now here I made reference to the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Naval blockade is a strategic instrument to impose one's will on the adversary. The most recent and effective event of naval blockade happened during the hottest decade of the Cold War, that is 1960s. It was in the month of October 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis under the presidency of John F. Kennedy. The United States of America had imposed a naval blockade on Cuba and it was effective. The geographical location of Cuba and graphical illustration of the extent of the naval blockade of Cuba could be viewed with this map which is I am projecting. The USA was apprehensive about Cuba receiving nuclear materials from Soviet Russia via the Atlantic Ocean sea routes. Now, during this event, that is the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States Navy stopped and checked all the vessels in the blockaded area in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, it must be mentioned here that before becoming the President of United States of America, John F. Kennedy was a Second World War veteran and he was a patrol boat commander in the United States of America's Navy, and definitely he is famous for the gallantry he had shown during one of the attacks by the Japanese naval forces on his patrol boat. So John F. Kennedy actually was a Second World War United States of America's Navy officer. A naval blockade means to see a particular area of sea or gulf or ocean to prevent inward and outward movement of all kinds of vessels. Broadly, blockade is an act of war. Broadly, blockade is an act of war by which the belligerent prevents access to and departure from a defined part of the enemy's coast. Blockade is conducted by naval forces only to prevent vessels of all nations from entering or exiting specified ports or coastal areas belonging to or under the control of an enemy nation or their allies. It depends on the situation. Under the international law, a blockading force has the right to seize as prize any merchant ship, be it of the enemy or of any neutral nation also, that attempts to run the blockade either by entering or by leaving the blockaded area. Now there could be three types of blockades: strategic blockade, commercial blockade and pacific blockade. Now first one, that is the strategic blockade. In strategic naval blockade, the objective is to defeat the enemy in war by cutting down his resources and stopping his movement in the sea. Now this is an act of war. Second is commercial blockade. Now this aims causing trade losses on the part of the enemy. This is not an act of war. Third type is using or used during peacetime. It is called as pacific blockade. This is one of the compulsive ways to settle international disputes. Even the United Nations can adopt this method, that is Pacific blockade, under collective measures to settle disputes. Now, in sum total, a naval blockade is for denial of reinforcements, resupply, and maritime trade to the enemy, degrading enemies' war waging capability, enforcement of sanctions, containment of enemy's military forces behind the blockading line, and to end enemy's access to and control of sea or any oceanic water bodies. Now, to make a naval blockade successful, following elements are essential. First is blockade has to be effective, and for that there is requirement of sufficient force. Blockade has to be maintained continuously. That is, naval forces executing the blockade must be present in the area continuously. Third is there should not be any discrimination between the ships of different countries. Fourth is stoppage of movement has to be universal. Fifth is there must be a clear cut communication of the blockade locally and globally through diplomatic channels, of course, and that has to be communicated to neutral countries also. A blockade has to be properly declared and notified to the uh, concerned state or maybe all over the globe. The geographical limits have to be clearly indicated. That is, it is necessary to, while communicating, it is necessary to communicate the demarcated area. So, geographical limits have to be clearly indicated. Now, what is the stoppage moment of a naval blockade? Again, first moment is when the country enforcing the blockade withdraws the blockade. Second, when the ships, vessels, and other equipment maintaining the blockade leaves the area. Third is when there is lapse in the effectiveness of blockade due to continuous and frequent violations of blockade by enemy ships or any other ships. Now, here to further our understanding of the subject, that is naval blockade, in terms of geographical difficulties, I am making reference to some observations made by Lieutenant Jason Lancaster, who belongs to the Navy of the United States of America, and the source of his writing I have mentioned in the description of the video. Now, according to Lieutenant Lancaster, blockade is an instrument of a maritime nation, basically to impose its will on its adversary. So, this is a mind game. Though the physical equipment is involved, actually, whenever there is an element of enforcement of will, ultimately it means that naval blockade is actually a mind game. However, the overall impact of a naval blockade questionable. Yes, it could be in questions because accounting has to be done post facto accounting of the gains of a naval blockade has to be done. Now, naval blockades have been part of military strategy, but they cannot be decisive factor in victory, in overall victory. This does not anyway reduce by any amount the importance of the naval forces. Actually, naval blockade is a separate, could be a separate talk, but in this environment of uh, integrated operations and integrated military philosophy, one wing cannot override the other wing. That is the three dimensions I'm talking about. Anyway, now blockade is an act of politico-economic in nature. However, its overall political implications could be different. Naval blockade has to pass through the challenges of physical difficulties and political challenges also. And as I said, oceans and seas are frequently or dynamic geographical conditions in terms of particularly weather conditions and the state of the sea in an area. The naval blockade makes an impact ashore. It cannot be regarded as a standalone military operation. Lieutenant Lancaster imagines a hypothetical situation of naval blockade in his article, and it is in the Indo-Pacific region, South China Sea particularly, but in its extension to the state of Malacca. Now I'm projecting a map for a while. Now the map projection highlights the complicated region of the South China Sea to the ocean through the Strait of Malacca. We are trying to imagine the naval blockade of some country in South China Sea through the Strait of Malacca. The challenges of naval blockade in this particular geographical area are, first of all, the Strait of Malacca is a very complicated geographical region. You can see it on the map. Any naval blockade in the Strait of Malacca has to be complemented with blockade of the Sunda Strait and the Lombok Strait. Now, this naval blockade cannot be done single-handedly. The case or the event in the situation of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which happened in the very plain waters of the Atlantic Ocean, situation in the Strait of Malacca is complicated. The Cuban Missile Crisis or the naval blockade of Cuba was a very straightaway affair between the Soviet Russia and the United States of America. Here, in the state of Malacca, we are talking about at least 10 to 12 countries. So naval blockade in the state of Malacca cannot be done single-handedly, even by a topmost naval superpower. The adjoining maritime nations have to be acting in concert with the blockading superpower. The traffic passing through the area can easily outnumber the naval presence for the blockade in this area. For instance, at an average, 200 to 250 vessels pass through the Strait of Malacca daily. So that the amount of traffic actually passing through the Strait of Malacca is in this range, around 200 to 250 vessels every day. Now that's it from me on this topic. Now, for further in-depth understanding of sea power strategy, you can join Athena Academy of Geopolitics, which is now powered by ADITHENEX EduCom Pvt.Ltd. I have designed a separate section to focus on geostrategic importance of the Indian Ocean and the uh, because of which I feel proud. There is a separate section on the achievements of the Indian Navy also in the overall syllabus, which I have designed on the sea power and how India is becoming 100% rich in terms of building its own naval equipment, that is nuclear powered submarines and aircraft carriers and etc. I'm definitely sure that India is going to rise first as the greatest regional naval power in the region, Indo-Pacific region. And yes, I want my country as the supreme navy in the world someday in the future. Thank you so much. Bye for now. Thank you for logging on to my channel. I will keep posted. Thank you.
This is video broadcast of Athena Academy of Geopolitics.